Hello, boys and girls and babes. Welcome back to the Jenaya Talks Caps podcast. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in today. And we would like to invite you, if you haven't already, to please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast if you're enjoying yourself here, as we are doing an episode every week and we wouldn't want you to miss one. And for today's episode, I wanted to talk about the Caps' defensive core because it is starting to take shape here for next season and beyond, following some trades prior to the trade deadline and some important re-signings as well. So if you missed it, let's catch you up here right now. So first, the Caps traded longtime D-man Dmitry Orlov to the Boston Bruins, cashing in on the pending unrestricted free agent by getting back a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick, as well as forward Craig Smith, while also sending another pending unrestricted free agent, that being forward Garnet Hathaway, to the Bruins as part of that transaction as well. Then the Caps used that extra first-round pick acquired from the Bruins as part of that trade, and they turned around and flipped it to Toronto along with pending unrestricted free agent defenseman Erik Gustafsson, to acquire young stud defenseman Rasmus Sandin from the Leafs in a trade that Leafs Nation is pretty damn upset about. Sandin is leading all NHL defensemen in points since the trade, but we will get to that in just a little bit here. So the so-called first-round pick that the Caps had gotten from Boston and flipped to Toronto for Sandin is, of course, likely to be so late in the first round that it is practically going to be a second rounder. So, that's why I call it the so-called first round pick, because the Bruins, obviously, they're likely to go far in the playoffs, where they're finishing in the standings. So it's going to be a very late first round pick. Like I said, it makes it practically a second rounder. And you are getting back Rasmus Sandin, who himself was a first round pick by Toronto just a few short years ago in 2018. So Sandin, a couple of important keys for the Caps here in this trade. Sandin is 22 years old, or he was 22 years old when they acquired him. He actually just had his 23rd birthday just the other day, so a happy belated birthday to Rasmus Sandin. But yeah, this is a great trade for the Caps. He's young. He's already a very, very good NHL player with the potential to be a great NHL player. Uber talented. He has a super high ceiling. And, perhaps just as importantly, he is already under contract at a laughably small cap hit of just $1.4 million per season. So he's got this season and next season on that deal. And then even when his current contract does eventually get set to expire, he would only be a restricted free agent even at that point. So that's important because it essentially gives the Caps a lot of power, as they are the only team that would be able to sign him. So like I said, he's young, he's inexpensive, he's very good. And we'll get to a little bit more, like I said, on just how good he's actually been, just a little bit later in this episode here, as his start to his Capitals career has quite literally been historic. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. But yeah, like I said, he's under team control for the foreseeable future, which, as you know, in a salary cap world, that is critically important, to have good young players who are yours and yours alone, to build your team around. When you start trying to build your team through UFA signings, that's generally when shit starts getting expensive, right? And not to mention dicey as well, because those players who are in the UFA period of their careers are generally seeking and signing long-term deals. And, they're already really too old at that point to be signing those deals, those long-term deals, that is. So the UFA side of things is usually not an advisable way to build your team, as we have seen, like I said, time and time again around the league from teams like my hometown Vancouver Canucks, for example, who have managed to stretch what was supposed to be originally a 3 to 4 year rebuild It's now it's been like a decade and counting, because they keep trying to take those shortcuts in free agency. So 9 times out of 10, that does not work. So for the Caps, the Sandin trade was a great deal, a great add for them to their team for this season, next season, and probably for many more seasons after that too. For the Leafs, not so much. Kyle Dubas, he was having a little bit of a brain fart here with this one, hence why their fans are so pissed off about it. If you are Brian McClellan in this situation, you just play it cool. You dot the I's, you cross the T's, and then you hang up the freaking phone before Dubas has time to change his mind, to come to his senses. If Dubas tries to call back, you let the machine get it, baby. Like, sorry, bro. We were gone home for the day. I did not get your message until after the ink was already dry on the trade. Thanks for playing, though. So Dmitry Orlov out, Erik Gustafsson out, and Rasmus Sandin in. And then in terms of re-signings on the back end, a couple of really key ones, as the Caps got both Nick Jensen and Trevor Van Riemsdyk locked up with 3-year deals. And so those are both important re-signings, and we'll get into more detail on why those two guys are so important, why they're so effective. Like in terms of the deals, and in terms of how the decor is shaping up for next season and beyond, I really like it. I really like what the Caps have done here. I really like the direction that they're going in. For a guy like Nick Jensen, it was really, really important if this team plans on contending for another Stanley Cup during the rest of the Alex Ovechkin era and, remaining competitive in that respect, which I do wholeheartedly believe that they do have every intention of doing that. And that's why we're seeing this. That's why we're seeing more of a retooling here, if you will, reloading for next season and the one after that and the one after that, rather than doing a full rebuild at this point. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to remain competitive, and try again next season for another Stanley Cup, then getting Nick Jensen re-signed was a big part of that, as he has really turned himself into a very reliable top 4 defenseman. He's a very good defender, and he's added some offense to his game as well since joining the Caps a few years ago. And you know what? Right shot, top 4 defensemen, they do not grow on trees, right? As roughly half of the NHL seems to find out every single year, come the trade deadline, come free agency, these guys are not easy to find. And, even if you are lucky enough to find one, what are the chances that guy is going to actually fit into your team the way that Jensen fits in here? It's not an easy thing to find, and the Caps already have it in Nick Jensen, so you may as well just keep it instead of starting all over from scratch trying to find it again. So yeah, like I said, we will be digging into some numbers here on all of these guys during this episode, taking a deep dive at some of the underlying stats. Just what makes these guys so good, so important. But it was also great to see that the Caps didn't go past a 3-year extension on either of Jensen or Van Riemsdyk, as they are both in their early 30s now. Jensen's 32, Van Riemsdyk is 31 now. So the Caps basically said, hey, we'll sign you for these next 3 seasons, during which we plan on competing for another Stanley Cup. And then after that, we'll reevaluate where we're at. They didn't go overboard on term at all. They got them both to agree to shorter term contracts, which is great. That way you're not still paying them when they start to get old and start to slow down, right? You're not locked into anything. So you will maintain your flexibility. So it's kind of the perfect situation from the Cap standpoint. I'm a little bit surprised that they got those guys, particularly Jensen, who probably could have cashed in on the open market with the last couple of seasons that he's had. I'm a little bit surprised that they got those guys to agree to a shorter term contract, to a 3-year deal. But hey, it's good for us, right? Obviously they wanted to stay here, and we are glad to have them. So the decor for next season is shaping up like this. So obviously John Carlson, Rasmus Sandin, and now Nick Jensen and Trevor Van Riemsdyk as well. And then you've got, obviously, Martin Fehervary, who's an RFA. He's a restricted free agent, but, he's pretty clearly going to be re-signed. The Caps see him as a big part of their present and their future as well. Brian McClellan, he said as much when he was speaking at the trade deadline. Fehervary, big part of the present and the future for the Caps. And then to fill out that last spot in the regular top six, assuming that the Caps don't sign any defensemen from outside of the organization during free agency, or make any other trades, then to fill out that last spot in the top six, you've got a couple of nice options in youngsters, Alexeyev and Vinny Iorio, both of whom do appear ready for NHL duty. And by the way, that's yet another reason why the Trevor Van Riemsdyk re-signing was such a good one, because as we know, TVR is he's very comfortable playing both sides of the ice. He doesn't care if he's lining up on the right side or on the left side. He's equally good at both. And that is very important, especially when you're bringing young guys into the lineup. You want those young guys to be playing on their natural sides so that they can get comfortable at the NHL level and feel confident playing on their natural sides of the ice. So Alexeyev, he is a natural lefty, while Vinny Iorio is a natural right D. So with Trevor Van Riemsdyk, you kind of insulate those young guys with the flexibility to play them on their natural sides of the ice. Not to mention, of course, that TVR is also a great partner to have when you're a young guy coming into the league, as TVR plays, a very calm, mistake-free game, which is often exactly what a young player needs and wants skating next to him. So that's a really good decor, a nice mix of veterans and young guys with high ceilings. I actually thought that the Caps had a pretty good decor heading into this season as well. And to be fair, I still think that was the case. The team was on an insane run where they were winning almost every single game until John Carlson got hit in the head with a slap shot, and everything went to shit. So, but that's kind of to be expected. John Carlson is a guy that you simply cannot replace, right? You just can't replace him. He's one of the very best defensemen in the entire league. He's the highest scoring defenseman in the league over the last 5 years, dating back to the season that the Caps won the Cup. So you can't replace him. You just can't replace a guy like that, despite everyone's best efforts. Everyone's trying here, but that's kind of exactly what we've seen since he went out with injury. The Caps really just haven't been the same. So Japers Rink, if you guys know the blog Japers Rink, Capitals blog, they did a great write-up, a great article showing the exact impact that John Carlson has on this team, and he is irreplaceable. So just to throw some stats at you from this article, Carlson wins above replacement. He's in the 93rd percentile in the league. So that means essentially that, if you haven't heard of that stat before, I'll explain it a little bit. So essentially what that means is that he is in the top 7% in the league in terms of how many extra wins his impact on the ice bags in the standings for the Caps. So it's a great stat to measure a player's overall impact on the success of their team. He's also, he's in the 97th percentile in the league in even strength offense. So he's in the top 3% of the entire league. He's in the 84th percentile on the power play, the 95th percentile in finishing ability, the 88th percentile in goals per 60 minutes, the 92nd percentile in primary assists per 60 minutes, etc., etc., etc. The list goes on and on and on for John Carlson. So basically, he's in the top 5% or at least the top 10% of all players in the league in most of these categories, offensive categories especially. And where these numbers get even crazier is when you start looking at how the Caps as a team perform with John Carlson in the lineup versus when they don't have him in the lineup. These numbers literally blew my mind. I'm not kidding you. It's crazy. I always knew that he was important. I've never been kind of on that trade John Carlson bandwagon. I've never been one of those people, but I always knew that he was important, so I always wanted him around. But even I didn't realize that he is this important. So prior to Carlson's injury, the Caps were averaging over 3 goals per game, and their power play was over 20% effective. Which were both, quite frankly, pretty darn impressive numbers given the other injuries that the Caps, were dealing with, particularly to a lot of their star forwards. So, remember, they had no Nicklas Backstrom, no TJ Oshie, and no Tom Wilson, among many others. So those numbers, given the team's injury situation at the time, were pretty darn impressive, like I said. So since Carlson's injury, however, and at the time that they wrote this article, the Caps had dropped to scoring only 2.11 goals per game, and their power play had dropped to just 14% efficiency. I believe since this article was published, it's actually gotten even worse than that. Particularly the power play, I think, is like 2 for its last 23 or something like that. So like under 10% effectiveness. But like the overall offense as well, like it's not just the power play, the overall offense, 2.11 goals per game is the worst mark in the entire NHL over that span. And so like just to hammer the point home even more, with Carlson on the ice this season, the Caps offense at 5-on-5 is a whopping 19% better than the league average. Without Carlson, it's 4% worse than the league average. That's a 23% difference. 23 percentage points. That's crazy. The Caps score 3.07 goals per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 when Carlson is on the ice. And when he's not on the ice, that number drops by more than half of a goal to 2.48 goals per 60 minutes. So that stat alone, like it's not hard to see why Carlson's in the top 7% in the league in wins above replacement. Losing half of a goal per game is going to sink any team. I don't care who you are. Like, I don't care if you have prime Patrick Waugh on net. The impact here is similar to like when you take Alex Ovechkin out of the Capitals lineup as well. A scenario that has seen them go 0-5 this season. 5 games without Ovi, 5 regulation losses. Because similar to John Carlson's impact, though it is different in the sense that, you know, Ovi usually just puts the puck in the net himself. But it is similar because obviously Ovi, too, he provides over half a goal per game on the scoreboard. And most nights, that level of impact is more than enough to make the difference between winning and losing. Half a goal a game is a lot, you guys. And similarly on the power play, we see the same sort of impact from John Carlson that we do at 5-on-5. So with John Carlson on the ice for the Caps on the power play, their power play is 8% better than the league average. Without John Carlson, however, it's an absolutely insane 20% worse than the league average. So the power play scores 8.09 goals per 60 minutes with Carlson on the ice, and without him, that number drops by more than 2 full goals to 6.04 goals per 60 minutes. That is just nutty. And again, Carlson's numbers this season also came largely on a power play that did not yet feature the services of a guy like Nicklas Backstrom, who we know from extensive statistical analysis, Nicklas Backstrom also makes the Caps power play a whole lot better when he's in the lineup and on the ice. So the fact that Carlson was able to put up those kinds of numbers and have that kind of positive impact, even when there was not yet any Nicklas Backstrom, and largely there was no TJ Oshie either, as he too missed a large chunk of the portion of the season that Carlson was able to play in. So the fact that Carlson did all of that without those two guys being available out there, that's pretty damn impressive and pretty damn crazy. Carly was having another monster season before getting hit in the head with that puck. He was I can't quite remember, but I think he was like 3rd on the team in scoring when he got injured. So as Jay Berserink so eloquently put it, I love the way that they put this. With John Carlson, the Caps' underlying metrics largely resemble that of the Carolina Hurricanes. Without John Carlson, they're the Vancouver Canucks. And that's why, at the time that Carlson got injured, the Capitals' playoff odds sat at more than 90% at that time. And now, after nearly 3 months without him, their playoff odds are at a little over 5%. But that's also why I thought that the Caps really didn't and don't need to panic, if they don't make the playoffs this season, because they are still a good team. Like this article from Jay Berserink showed, like with John Carlson healthy, they're the Carolina Hurricanes. The Carolina Hurricanes are a great team. So long as John Carlson is healthy for next season, everything is going to be fine. There's no need to overreact. Shit happens. Injuries happen. And once in a while, like, you're just going to have a season where absolutely everything goes wrong, and that's just the way it is. And this has been that season for the Caps. Like, anything that could go wrong, it's gone wrong, right? Like, and that just, it happens sometimes. You move on, you reload for next season, because when everyone's healthy, this is still a very good hockey team. We saw it in December during a 13-2-2 stretch where the Caps looked unbeatable. We saw what they were capable of. So it's not like they don't still have that in them. So like if this does turn out to be the case, if they do miss the playoffs this season, there's not much to do for me, except just to get over it and get ready for next season. Like I said, I don't think they need to be panicking. So, and Carlson is getting healthy. He's back on the ice now. And he actually just practiced with his teammates for the first time since the injury just the other day, which is obviously a huge step forward. So very positive to see that. He's showing really good signs, and that's really great to see looking ahead to next season. It was a scary injury. Hard to watch, really hard to watch. So, that's great news for the Caps, that he's showing all of these good signs, being back on the ice, practicing with his teammates. It's great for all of the reasons that we just mentioned. It's great. It will be huge to get him back. And then obviously the Sandin trade is huge as well. And that's actually already paying massive dividends for the Caps, as he has jumped right in and made an immediate impact, a huge impact. And he's kind of helped to get the Caps like right back into this Eastern Conference playoff race a little bit. After we had all, I think, largely written off this season, written off the possibility of making the playoffs, all of a sudden they're 3-1-1 since the trade deadline. After selling, I might add, but they did add Rasmus Sandin. So they're 3-1-1 since the trade deadline, and all of a sudden they're right back in it. So, and their last two games, like, first they forced one of the best teams in the league this season, the New Jersey Devils, to a shootout decision. So they pick up a valuable standings point there in what was supposed to be basically a scheduled regulation loss. And then they turn right around and go into New York and absolutely dismantle the New York Islanders in their own barn. And that's obviously, like, that's a team that the Caps are directly chasing in the standings for that last wildcard spot into the Eastern Conference playoffs. So that was obviously, it goes without saying, that was a huge, huge victory. The season was probably over if the Caps lose that game. You can't afford to lose many games at this point in general, but you certainly cannot afford to lose them to the teams directly in front of you who you're directly chasing for that wildcard spot. So, season was probably over if the Caps lose that game. Certainly if they lose that game in regulation. But instead they go into the Islanders' house, they fuck shit up, and they walk out with a 5-1 regulation win and 2 massive standings points. And so all of a sudden, like I mentioned, they are legitimately right back in it. It would still probably be considered a long shot, but it is getting to be a little bit less of a long shot with each and every game that the Caps win, with Rasmus Sandin putting up 3-point games as if it's the easiest thing in the world. So it's about to get interesting down the stretch here. And like I said, I told you that I would have some stats for you on Rasmus Sandin. So here they are, coming at you hot. First off, he became the first defenseman in franchise history to record 3 points in his debut. Then, the very next game, he became the first in franchise history, again, to record 5 points in his first 2 games. So, like, we're off to a roaring start. Dmitry Orlov, who? Just kidding, Orly. I still love and appreciate you. And then, like, against the Islanders the other night, Sandin became the first player in franchise history to record 3 multi-point games in his first 4 games with the team. Not the first defenseman, the first player in franchise history. And he also set the franchise record for the most points with a whopping 8 of them through his first 4 games with the team. And again, that's of any player of any position, not just defensemen. So franchise record, like, this is a franchise that has names like Alex Ovechkin, like Nicholas Backstrom. Like, that's a pretty big, like, tip of the cap to him. So I would say that this guy's looking pretty good. Like, this trade is looking pretty good for the Caps right now. And I'm sure that it will probably continue to go that way because he's young and he's only going to get better. So his overall stat line so far as a Capital: 4 games played, 8 points, with 6 of those being primary points as well. So like a primary point that's either a goal or a primary assist. And then 6 of his 8 points as a Cap have also come during even strength play, which is both very impressive and a very good sign when looking at how sustainable these types of numbers might be for him. He's not just relying on the power play. He's doing it largely at even strength. So that's a very good sign. Though it should also be mentioned that he has also shown off some insane abilities on the power play already too, including dishing a perfect pass over to Alex Ovechkin right in the grade 8's wheelhouse for a one-timer and a goal. So Rasmus Sandin, he's a +7 already through just 4 games with the Caps. So he's showing off some really strong defensive instincts and abilities as well. Especially for such a young player. Like, that's a complaint with young defensemen, especially, is that it takes them quite a while normally to kind of come into their own. Like, defensemen usually don't get to like their full potential, like how good they're actually going to be, until they're like in their late 20s. So like I said, he's 22 or 23 now, so, excuse me, he had his birthday, so he's 23 years old, and he's already like super good, both ends of the ice. So he's been on the ice for a lot of goals for and almost none against since being traded to the Caps. That was true in Toronto too, by the way, for him. So in fact, like, I'm trying to remember right now if he has even been on the ice yet for a goal against as a Cap. None are popping immediately into my mind. Maybe you guys can let me know in the comment section. But yeah, like, he's been equally as impressive defensively as he has been offensively, which is obviously saying a lot, as his offense has been lit as fuck. So he's creating goals for us out of absolutely nothing out there, like literally out of thin air. Boom. There's yet another goal created by Rasmus Sandin. So the impact that he's come in and immediately had has been incredible, and it's showing up in the wins column for the Caps, and it's, of course, coming during a critical point in the season for the team. And, like, Sandin's underlying stats have been just as impressive as the actual points that he's putting up on the scoreboard as well. So, like, the last time that I had checked, which was before he went ahead and put up another 3 primary assists against the New York Islanders. So I'm sure this number is going to be even better now after that. But the last time that I had checked, his wins above replacement score was in the 99th percentile in the league, which means his positive impact on his team, whether it's been here in Washington or whether it was during his time on the Leafs, his positive impact on whichever team he plays for is in the top 1% of the entire National Hockey League. That is fucking bananas, dude. Like, it is bananas that a team would trade a 22-year-old who is that insanely good at hockey already. Like, it's crazy. I don't know what they were thinking. For comparison's sake, and just so you realize just how good you have to have been in order to clock in the 99th percentile of this league, Jacob Chychrun, for example, who the Caps were reportedly very interested in before they learned that they might be able to pry Sandin away from the Leafs, Jacob Chychrun is in the 61st percentile in the same stat. Matthias Ekholm, whom the Canadian media up here was making a big deal out of the Oilers acquiring him, he's in the 78th percentile. So these guys are not even close to Sandin in this regard. So, and again, wins against replacement, like, it's a really good stat. It shows overall the total positive impact that you have on your team. So essentially, like, how good is your team with you versus how good is your team without you? How many wins do you add to your team's win column just by being there and doing what you do? And Sandin largely does what he does by being an absolute puck possession machine. Teams just can't get the puck off of him. And like when he has the puck, he creates scoring chances for himself and his teammates at such an elite rate that it's almost literally unmatched in the league. Hence the 99th percentile, right? So his even strength, like I'll break these down for you guys a little bit more. Just pulling it up here. So his even strength offense is in the 98th percentile. So that's his even strength offense, 98th percentile. His finishing ability is 84th percentile. His goals per 60 minutes is 85th percentile. His creation of scoring chances for his line mates is 91st percentile. His successful entries into the offensive zone are 90th percentile. His passing in all situations is 91st percentile. And then defensively as well, his successful exits of his own D zone are in the 93rd percentile. So, like, we know how important that is, getting out of your own zone. Like, when you have a defenseman who can exit the zone that successfully, that frequently, like, that's huge. So, you know, he doesn't have many weaknesses at all, if any. And he's absolutely elite at so many things, so many areas of the game. So, and it is worth noting as well that Sandin has been able to put up these gaudy underlying numbers while really not playing what you would call sheltered minutes at all. Neither here in Washington nor in Toronto under their head coach Sheldon Keefe. Which is kind of what you see so often with young players. Like, coaches will often kind of shelter them from the tougher minutes, the tougher assignments. But that has not been the case for Sandin in his career. He was thrown right into the fire right away in Toronto, playing some tough minutes against good competition. His stats are definitely not inflated by getting a bunch of ozone starts or anything like that. In fact, like, Sheldon Keefe started him in the D zone a lot. Probably because, as I just mentioned, he is so elite at getting his team out of trouble in their own zone, exiting the D zone successfully on his first attempt just about every single time. And obviously, Peter Laviolette has thrown him right into the fire here as well. Sandin is averaging over 25 minutes a night so far in his Caps career, playing on the top pairing against tough competition, and he is excelling. But yeah, like, I just think that like, that's important to note, right? Like, that whether it's been here in Washington or whether it was during his tenure with the Leafs, he has not been sheltered at all. And so, like, it's not like these numbers are making him look better than he is. He really just is that good. And so he's been able to put up these, like I said, gaudy numbers, all while playing tough minutes with tough assignments against good competition. And in Toronto, too, he was able to produce, even though he was frequently deployed by Sheldon Keefe, not with the best of line mates. Like, he wasn't on the ice a lot, with Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Willie Nylander, John Tavares, or what have you. And yet he was still able to produce, even though he was usually feeding the puck to the likes of Toronto's third and fourth line forwards, which, like, if you've ever taken a peek at Toronto's third and fourth lines, they've been nothing to write home about for most of Sandin's tenure there. Let's just say that. So, I mean, like, he's a crafty player. He's creative. He's a very smart player. And like I said, he creates something out of nothing a lot. We've seen it a lot already in just 4 games here that he's been in Washington. So, and like I said, a lot of what he does it with puck possession too. So both during his tenure with the Leafs and during his time here in Washington so far, his team sees both nearly 60% of the shot attempts, plus 60% of both the actual and expected goals going in their favor at even strength when Sandin is on the ice. So those are very nice numbers, some of the very best in the entire league, in fact. And of course, like, a perfect example of this came against the New Jersey Devils the other night. As the Devils, obviously everyone knows, like, they're one of the absolute best puck possession teams in the entire league right now, all season long. And yet Sandin, he controlled 60% of the shot attempts when he was on the ice for the Caps, playing against the Devils' top players all night on Washington's top pairing. Sandin skated a career-high 29:58, so basically 30 minutes, a half hour, half of the game. 29:58 in that game, and he was a +2 as well. in this game that was 2-2 after regulation in the overtime period. So he was on the ice again for both of the Capitals' goals for and none against. So like the way that he has been playing, honestly, like I would have put him in the shootout too. I would have thrown him out there. I don't care. He probably would have scored and we would have won. So, but yeah, I mean, like once John Carlson is healthy, whether that ends up being this season or next, this league had better watch out, man. Like if we put a pairing of John Carlson and Rasmus Sandin out there, if that ends up being a thing, that pairing is never leaving the offensive zone. Seriously. Like what fun that would be. Just a straight up shooting gallery basically at the opposition net. Like they would never, ever, ever leave the ozone. And then of course, Nick Jensen, we know what he brings. So just want to run through some stats on some of these other guys here. So Nick Jensen wins above replacement, that stat that I was talking about. So wins above replacement, he's in the 93rd percentile as well in the league, in the whole league. So and Nick Jensen, like he is commonly referred to amongst the analytics community as what they like to call an analytical darling. They love him over there because all of his underlying metrics are so strong. So he also draws a shit ton of penalties using his elusive skating ability. And on the flip side, he's very disciplined himself. Like he hardly takes any penalties, which is a very good thing because he's also one of the best penalty killers. Trevor Van Riemsdyk, like getting him re-signed was, I think, a lot more important than I think a lot of people probably realize. Just because so much of what he does out there goes unnoticed so much of the time. Like he's sort of one of those unheralded, just unheralded types of players who, he doesn't necessarily get the credit he deserves every night. Well, he does from his teammates, but not necessarily from fans sometimes. So, like I said, a lot of what he does goes unnoticed. But so yeah, like he doesn't necessarily get the credit that he deserves every night, but he is so important to the team's success. And you know what they say about defensemen, like if you have a defenseman that you don't even notice him when he's out there, then that's honestly like that's exactly the type of defenseman that you want on your team. Because usually when you're noticing defensemen, it's because they're fucking up and the puck's in the back of your net. That's when you usually notice defensemen. So going unnoticed is oftentimes a very good thing when it comes to D-men. And I think that pretty much describes TVR's game perfectly to a T. So a lot like Nick Jensen, TVR just does so many of the little things well. He hardly ever makes a mistake out there. He just plays a very calm, mistake-free game. And as I mentioned, like he does so many of the little things that a team needs in order to win games, which is probably why his wins above replacement score is in the 90th percentile in the league. So like that's really fucking good for like a third pairing defenseman too. But that's the thing about TVR too. Like he's a third pairing guy on the Caps when everybody's healthy, but like he can move up and down the lineup. Like he's capable of that. So talking about the little things that he does well, I just want to run through some of these here as well. So he leads the team and he's 7th in the entire NHL in blocked shots. So that's huge. And he is first in shorthanded ice time on the 6th best penalty kill in the entire league. So he's a right shot defenseman, as we know, but as we've already talked about, he can play the right side or the left side equally effectively, which is huge. It gives the coaching staff a ton of flexibility with their lineup. And like I said, he can play as high as your top pairing when there's injuries, and still provide good minutes, effective minutes. So in a lot of ways, like even though the Caps and their fans obviously appreciate TVR and everything that he brings because we see him every single night, I think around the league, like, whether it be media, whether it be fans of other teams, he still kind of flies under the radar a little bit, which is unfortunate for him, but like, I just don't think people notice him because he, like I said, he just does so many little things so well, so many details of the game, and he does go unnoticed a lot of the time just because he plays a really quiet, effective game. Like he just doesn't make mistakes. You don't notice him out there. So, but yeah, I mean, he does everything so well. So in my mind, he is a very underrated player, in my opinion. And it's a very good keep for the Caps, who obviously are hoping to come back strong again next season and compete for another Stanley Cup. So TVR, he's going to be a big part of that. He's a very important player. And then obviously Martin Fehervary, we know what he brings. A young, already very good defenseman. And what I love about Fehervary is he's pretty mean out there on the ice too. He's hovered around the top 10 in hits in the NHL since coming into the league. Even as a kid, he's still a kid, but even when he very first came into the league and he was really a kid, right from his very first game, he's never been shy to throw his body around, and he's a big, strong kid. So, as is, by the way, Alexeyev, Alexeyev, the Caps 6'4", first-round pick in 2018. He looks primed to finally get his chance in the NHL next season. He's played some games for the Caps, more recently here after the trade deadline, after the Caps traded away some veterans, and obviously with all of the injuries for the Caps as well. So he's getting a look here right now, and he's looked really good. And importantly as well, he's looked good while playing some pretty big minutes against some pretty tough competition. In fact, before the Caps were able to complete the trade for Rasmus Sandin, Alexeyev was leading the team in ice time most nights due to injuries. And he handled that responsibility really well for such a young player. So that's very promising. And then as we talked about, the other option who's already within the Capitals' own organization is Vinny Iorio. So their top-rated defensive prospect who got to play in his first NHL game just a couple of weeks ago here, and he did really, really well. He actually recorded his first NHL point during his first NHL game. So that's always cool. You get your first NHL point during your first NHL game. That's a dream come true. And definitely a dream come true how he did it as well. He got the primary assist, nice pass from behind the net, primary assist on an Alex Ovechkin goal, which I have got to imagine must be just baking your first ever batch of chocolate with Willy Wonka himself handing you the sugar, right? That must have been really cool for this kid. That's a once in a lifetime moment for sure. So yeah, Iorio, he looked good. He looked like he's also probably ready for the NHL. The Caps have since sent him back down to Hershey, but that's because they don't want to burn a year off of his entry-level contract. So they don't want him to end up crossing that 10-game threshold here this season. Which, that's the smart decision, honestly. You always have to be thinking about how you can give yourselves a leg up on the salary cap. And keeping good young players on inexpensive entry-level contracts for as long as possible is a very good way of doing that. So, and then obviously, John Carlson is going to be John Carlson, right? And as you could probably tell from all of the stats that I shared earlier in the episode, those stats, all of those numbers, they make it pretty clear that it's not a coincidence that the Caps are in line to miss the playoffs for the first time in 9 years, the first year that he's missed due to injury. Not a coincidence, folks. So getting him back in the lineup for next season will instantly make this team 10 times better for next season. So, but yeah, I like what the Caps have done here. Like I said, getting a lot younger while still re-signing some key veterans in order to have that nice mix of youth and experience. And it's nice because they're going to have some young veterans on the team as well. Guys who have, they have the young, fast legs, but who also still come with that experience of having already played a lot in this league. So the Caps already had one of those guys on their back end in Marty Fehervary, and they add another one here with the trade for Rasmus Sandin. So it's kind of adding youth and speed without sacrificing the notches on your belt, if you will, that having that experience of already being in the league brings. They're not going to be they're not going to be panicked out there. They're calm. They've been here before. They've done this before. So they have a nice mix of all of that heading into next season. And as far as the trade deadline goes, the Caps, they kind of use the trade deadline not only to add an impact player like Sandin, but also to kind of the thing that I really noticed was they kind of got a lot faster by subtraction, by taking away, just by making these trades, by taking away guys like Dmitry Orlov, like Garnet Hathaway, like Lars Eller, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. While we may, as fans, we may have had sentimental attachments to these players, they are getting up there in years. They've slowed down a lot already. And in the cases of guys like an Orlov, a Hathaway, an Eller, those guys were never the fleetest of foot to begin with, right? So, speed was never really their strength. And so now that they've lost a step, or they've started to lose a step, you do really notice it a lot more, that they're just not that fast. And you're only going to notice it even more moving forward as the miles continue to pile on for those guys. And, the calendar years continue flipping by. So it was time to say goodbye, as painful as it is. And, now you bring in some young guys who are really fast, and you can notice the difference right away. Like, I don't think anyone would argue right now that the team has looked better and faster since selling at the trade deadline, which is honestly pretty hilarious to me. And like by far the most Caps thing, if you will, like the most Caps thing ever right now would be for them to go on a run here down the stretch and squeak into the playoffs anyway, after selling, after piling up assets at the deadline, and then pull off a nuclear level upset in the first round. Like, that would just be pure comedic gold. That would be so funny. Anyway, Caps fans, that's going to be all that we've got for you today. I do think I've rambled on long enough here for today. We did have a lot to talk about, though, as we always do. So please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already. Assuming, of course, that you do like what you hear, which I am assuming that you do, since you've clearly listened this far. This was not a short episode. So again, I'd just like to thank you all again so much for listening. We love having you here, and I love doing this show, and just getting to talk hockey with all of you. The sport that we all love, the team that we all love, the best fans in the league. Let's go Caps, baby. Until next time, babes, try not to stress too much about the remainder of the season. We're kind of playing with house money at this point from here on out. Like I said, sold at the deadline. It's all right now. It's just kind of whatever happens, happens. If it's meant to be, it'll be. And any other cliches that you want to use. So just try not to stress out too much. Your heart health is more important anyways. And we will chat again next week, babes. So talk to you then. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Let's go Caps.